Good afternoon. Today I will start the negotiable instruments at 8081 चा. Okay. तर ह्या ऍक्ट मध्ये आपण familiar with the endorsement, understand the meaning of across of bills, discuss the discharge of negotiable instruments. हा पार्ट आपण त्या ठिकाणी डिस्कस करणार आहोत. The act was original draft in 1866 by the Indian Law Commission and in December 1867 in the council and is also referred to a select committee. The draft then modified several times and was introduced in the council odds. Passed into law in 1881, beginning the Negotiable Instrumentation Act 1881. Subsequent amendments were then implemented from time to time. The Negotiable Instruments Act was in India in 1881. The Act operates subject to the provisions of Section 31 and 32 of the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. Negotiable instrument characteristics आपण त्या ठिकाणी पाहणार आहोत. तर फर्स्ट कॅरेक्टरिस्टिक्स इम्पॉर्टन्स कॅरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आहे त्या ठिकाणी negotiable instrument must be payable either to other or to bearer. हे फर्स्ट त्या ठिकाणी कॅरेक्टरिस्टिक्स. नेक्स्ट कॅरेक्टरिस्टिक्स आहे त्या ठिकाणी negotiable instruments are freely transferable from one person to another. Third, it is transferable infinitum. Its means can be transferred for any number of times. Next, the holder in due to course gets a good title to negotiable instruments even though the title of transferor is defective. The holder of the instruments is to other owner of the property constant it. And last one, negotiable instruments may name more than one fee pay jointly and alternately. So these 6 character that is negotiable instruments that is next point आहे त्या ठिकाणी pre-submissions as to negotiable instruments. तर याचे काही त्या ठिकाणी until the convert is proved, the following prescription shall be made in case of all negotiable instruments. The first आहे त्या ठिकाणी of considerations of consideration. Next आहे as the date. Third, as to time of expectance. Fourth, as to time of transfer. Fifth, as to order to endorsements. Sixth, as to stamp, and last that holder is due to course. हे सगळे त्या ठिकाणी नेगोटिएबल इन्स्ट्रुमेंट्सचे प्रिस्क्रिप्शन्स असलेले आपल्याला त्या ठिकाणी दिसतात. 7 आहे. फर्स्ट त्या ठिकाणी काय केलं जातं तर नेगोटिएबल इन्स्ट्रुमेंट्स ऑफ कन्सिडरेशन्स केलं जातं. त्याच्यानंतर ह्याच्यामध्ये प्रामुख्याने एक्सेप्ट केलं जातं की इनरोस इन्व्होमेटेड और ट्रान्सफर्ड वॉज एक्सेप्टेड इनरोस नेगोटिएटेड और ट्रान्सफर्ड for considerations. Next, as to date, as to time of expense, as to times of transfer, as to order of endorsements, as to stamp, that holder is holder in due course. त्याच्यानंतर promissory note sections 4 चे आहे. The promissory notes is an instruments is writing note being a bank note or a currency note containing an unconsidered undertaking signed by the maker to pay a certain sum of money to or to the other of a certain person or to the bearer of in the instruments. Essential characteristics of a promissory notes. फर्स्ट आहे त्या ठिकाणी फर्स्ट नोट्स आहे त्या ठिकाणी ही मस्ट बी इन रायटिंग. Mere variable promise to pay is not a promissory note. The method of writing is unimportant, but it must be in any form that cannot be altered easily. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी must certainly and express a promise to clear understand to pay. There are must be an express understanding to pay. A mere acknowledgements is not enough. The following are not promissory notes as there is no promise to pay. Next time must be unconsidered. A considered undertaking distorts the negotiable character of an otherwise negotiable instruments. Therefore, the promise to pay must not depend upon the happening of some outside contingency or event. It must be payable absolutely. Second, signed by the maker. The person who promised to pay must sign the instruments, even though it might have not been written by the promisor himself. There are no restrictions regarding the form or place of signatures in the instruments. It may be in any part of the instruments. It may be in pencil or link or thumb mark or instance. Next time, must be certain. Must be certain. The note self must show clearly who the person is agreeing to undertake the liberty to pay the amount. Next time, the P some the P some be certain. The instruments must point out with certainly the persons to whom the promise has been made. The P may be certain by name or may designations. The promise should be to pay money and money only. Money means legal tender money and not old and red coins. A promise to deliver paid other in the alternative or in additions to money does not constitute a promissory notes. The amount should be certain. One of the important characteristics of a promissory note in certainly not only regarding the persons to whom or by whom payment is to be made, but also regarding the amount. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी bill of exchange. हे त्या ठिकाणी हे जे बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज आहे तर निगोटिएबल Instruments Act 1881. A bill of exchange is defined as an instrument in writing contain an unconditional order signed by the makers directing a certain person to pay a certain sum of money only to or to the order of a certain person or to the bearer of the instruments. मग त्याचं त्या ठिकाणी एक्झाम्पल दिले ए बी हे करा. तर ह्या जे बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज मध्ये त्यांनी की जनरली ड्रॉ बाय द creditor on his debtor, it has to be accepted by the drawing or someone of his behalf. It is just a draft till it is acceptance. The person who draws or makes the bill is known as the drawer. His liberty is secondary and conditional. The persons on whom the bill is drawn is called the drawee. On the acceptance of the bill, the drawee is called as the acceptor. He becomes liable for the payment of the bill, and his liberty is primarily and unconditional. The person to whom the money is to be paid is known as the bill. Next, this a bill of exchange होता तसं check section त्यांनी सांगितलं तर चेक काय तर चेक मीन्स check is a bill of exchange drawn on a satisfied banker and it includes the electronic image of truncated checks and a check is electronic form. The check is always payable on demand. A check must certain all the characteristics of a bill of exchange. The essential characteristics of a check can be summarized as to under. तर चेकची त्या ठिकाणी काय असतं कॅरेस्टिक्स द फर्स्ट कॅरेस्टिक आहे इट मस्ट बी इन रायटिंग इट मस्ट बी सर्टन अँड एक्सप्रेस ऑर्डर टू पे द ऑर्डर टू पे मस्ट बी डिफाईन्ड अँड अनकंडिशनल इट मस्ट बी साइन बाय द ड्रॉवर ज्या ठिकाणी ज्या नीड्स दिल्या गेल्या त्याचं साइन त्या ठिकाणी असणं गरजेचे असते द सम contained in the order must be certain. The order must be to pay money only. Drawer, drawee, and pay must be certain. It always drawn upon a specified banker, and last, it is always payable on a demand. त्याच्यानंतर चेकचे त्या ठिकाणी हे सांगितलंय तर फर्स्ट आहे त्या ठिकाणी ट्रंकेट चेक्स आहे तर ट्रंकेट चेक्स मीन्स अ चेक विच ट्रंकेट during the course of a clearing cycle either by the clearing house or bank whether paying or receiving payment immediately on generations of an electronic image for transmissions substituting the further physical movement of the check in writing. हे ट्रंकल चेक्स त्या ठिकाणी आहे त्याच्यानंतर चेक्स इन इलेक्ट्रॉनिक फॉर्म जो आहे तर चेकचा इन इलेक्ट्रॉनिक फॉर्म मीन्स आता चेक विच कंटेन्स द एक्झॅक्ट mirror image of paper checks and is generated written and signed in square scheme ensuring the minimum safety standards with the use of digital signatures and asymmetric cryptography system. And last आहे त्या ठिकाणी presentment of truncated checks. The presentment of truncated checks means in case of an reasonable about the genesis of the electronic image of a trunk checks. For example, technique as to fraud, forex deal, temporary or descriptions of the instruments. The paying banker entitled to demand any further information regarding the truncated checks. The pay banker can also demand the presentment of truncated checks itself for verifications. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी डिफरन्सेस बिटवीन बिलिंग बिल फॉर एक्सचेंज अँड चेक्स बिल ऑफ एक्सचेंज आणि चेकचा डिफरंट त्या ठिकाणी सांगितला त्याच्यानंतर कॅपॅसिटी ऑफ अ पर्सन टू बी पार्टी ऑफ निगोटिएबल इन्स्ट्रुमेंट्स तर every person capable of contracting according to the law to which he is subject may be himself and be bound by the making, drawing, acceptance, endorsement, delivery, and negotiations of promissory note, bill of exchange or checks. A minor may draw, endorse, deliver, and negotiate such instruments so as to win all parties expect himself. Nothing herein contained shall be deemed to implore corporations to make, endorse, or accept such instruments, except in case in which under the law for the time being in force they are so empowered. An agent who signs in his name on a proposally note, bill of exchange, or checks without indicating thereon that he signs as an agent will be personally liable on instruments. Classifications of negotiable instruments. There are first classifications are the ठिकाणी order instruments. There are the order instruments is payable to order. First is which is payable to a particular persons. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी which is available to particular persons or is order, and third which is payable to the order of a particular persons. Next आहे barrier instruments. The first आहे त्या ठिकाणी barrier instruments. The first it is expressed to be payable to bearer. The last endorsement is in blank. A promissory note can not be payable to bearer. The bill of exchange cannot be made payable to bearer on demand. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी हे classification of negotiable instruments आहे order instruments and barrier instruments. Third आहे त्या ठिकाणी demand instruments. The demand instruments means काय तर a check is always payable on demand. A demand instrumentation may be presented for payment and a demand instruments may be presented for payment at any time. The demand instrument is not entitled to any day of grace. And next classifications are negotiable instruments. Time instruments. Time instruments means an instruments in which the time of payment is specified is known as time instrument. The time instruments may be payable. First is on a specified day or next after a specified period. Third, a certain period after sight, and fourth on the happening of an event which is certain to happen. Next types आहे त्या ठिकाणी inland instrument. Inland instruments मध्ये two त्या ठिकाणी include होतात. The draw or made in India and payable in India or in drawn on a person decision in India. त्याच्यानंतर next foreign instrument आणि Asians instruments. त्याच्यानंतर accommodations bill, justifications bill, and mandatory bill and clean bill. Clean bill means a bill to which no documents related to the goods is attached. Incomplete instruments or inchoate instruments sections first, where one person signs and delivers to another a paper stamp in accordance with the law relating to negotiable instruments, then invokes in and either wholly bank or having written their an incomplete negotiable instruments, he thereby gives SYMBA face authority to the holder thereof to make or complete as the case may be upon it negotiable instruments. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी maturity of negotiable instruments. The first checks are always payable on demand, but other instruments like bills and notes may be made payable of specified date or after specified time. Maturity of negotiable instruments means the date on which the negotiable instruments falls due for payment. The negotiable instruments which is payable otherwise than on demand is entitled to 3 days of grace. For calculations of date, first that types of instruments and date to maturity. The types of negotiable instrument payable are a specified date plus 3 days. किती याचा कॅल्क्युलेशन हे करून त्याचं डेट मॅच्युरिटी केली जाते हे चार्ट मध्ये दिलंय. त्यानंतर नेक्स्ट पॉइंट आहे त्या ठिकाणी निगोटिएशन्स Negotiations of an instruments is the process by which the ownership on an instruments is transferred from one person to another. According to sections 14 of the Act, when a note, bill, or check is transferred to any person so as to continue that person, the holder thereof, the instruments is said to be negotiated. Negotiable instruments can also be transferred by a separate deed of assignment, but in that case, the profits of negotiations will not be available to the assignee. For example, he will not enjoy the rights of a holder in due course. Two methods of the negotiation of instruments are: first method is negotiation by delivery, and second is negotiation by endorsement and delivery. The negotiation by deliveries means a barrier instruments by may be negotiated by delivery. The delivery must be voluntary, and negotiation by endorsement and delivery as order instrument can be negotiated only by a way of endorsement and delivery. Endorsement the endorsements हा वर्ड जो आहे तो लिटिल स्टाइलिश since means आहे त्याचं तर writing on the black on an instruments meant, but under the negotiable instruments act it means the writing of one name on the back of the instruments of any paper attached to it with the intention of transferring the rights therein. Thus, endorsement in signing a negotiable instruments for the purpose of negotiations. The person who effects an endorsement is called an endorser, and the person to whom negotiable instruments is transferred by endorsement is called the endorser. The payee of an instrument is the rightful person to make the first endorsement. Thereafter, the instruments may be endorsement by any person who has become the holder of the instruments. The maker or the drawer cannot endorse the instruments, but if any of them has become the holder thereof, he may endorsement the instruments. The maker of drawer cannot endorse of negotiation instruments unless he is in lawful possession of uh, instruments or it is the holder there of pay or endorse cannot endorsement or negotiate unless he is the holder thereof. Next kinds of endorsement तर त्याचे वेगवेगळे kinds type त्या ठिकाणी आहे. The first is a bank of general endorsement. तर bank blank and general endorsements means that it is an endorsement when the endorsed merely signs on the instruments without mentioning the name of the person in whose favor the endorsement is made. Endorsement in blank specifies no endorsee. It simply considers of the signatures of the endorsed on the endorsement. The negotiable instruments, even though payable or to order becomes a barrier instruments if endorsement in blank, then it is transferable by mere or delivery, and endorsement in blank may be followed by an endorsement in full. Next is special or full endorsement. When the endorsements contains not only the signatures of the endorsed, but also the name of the person in whose favor uh, the endorsement is made, then it is an endorsement in full. Thus, when endorsement is made by writing the words paid to or A is order, following by the signatures of the endorsement. Yeah, it is an endorsement in full. In such an endorsement, it is only the endorsee who can transfer the instrument. Next, the next types are the endorsements are paradial endorsement. Paradial endorsement means one which purports to transfer to the endorse a part only of the amount payable on the instruments, such as endorsement does not operate as a negotiations of the instruments. त्याच्यानंतर next आहे restrictive endorsement. The endorsement of an endorsement may contain terms making it restrictive endorsement in is one which either by express words restricts or prohibits the further negotiations of a bill, or which express that it is not a complete and unconditional transfer of the instruments, but is a mere authority to the endorsement to deal with the bill as directly by a such endorsement. Next, static type side conditional or qualified endorsement. It is often of the inverse to annex some conditions to his owner liberty on the endorsement. An endorsement where the endorsement limits or negatives his liberty by putting some conditions in the instruments is called a conditional endorsement. A condition imposed by the endorse may be a condition present or a condition subsequent. Conditional or qualified endorsement मधलं काही त्या ठिकाणी endorse may be made conditional or qualified in any other following forms. First is Can's resource. Can's resource means the endorser relieves himself from the liberty to all subsequent in store C. It is a type of endorsement or a negotiable instruments by which the endorser ablues himself or declines to accept any liberty on the instruments of any subsequent party. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी facultative. The endorser waives any of his rights. Next आहे contingent. The endorse maker makes his liberty depend upon happening of some event. Negotiable back. Negotiations back is a process under which an endorsee comes again into process of the instruments in each own right. Where a bill is re-endorsed to a previous endorse, he has no remedy against the intermediate parties to whom he was previously legally, though he may further negotiable the bill. Distinctions between negotiation and assignment. The difference between negotiation and assignment are given as follows. Negotiation assignment मध्ये difference त्या ठिकाणी दिला. त्याच्यानंतर across crossing of check. Crossing checks means the bank allows a customer to withdraw his money from his account on demand. However, the customer has to give his order in writing though a print check issued by the bank. Checks may be open check or cross checks. The banker is obliged to pay depending on the type of check. Certain checks can be handed over at the counter. The money can be received immediately. Other checks can be more complex in nature. A check must be in writing with an express order to pay another party. It should be defined and unconditional order. It consists of three parties. The person who makes the check it's called the drawer. The checks is down or the on the banker who is called the drawee, and the third party is the pay in the whose favor the checks is wrong. Uh, check is either open or closed. An open uncrossed checks is the one for which the banker has to pay cash across the counter when it is presently by the customer. And often checks is risky because if the holder of the check lose, it's any person who is in position of it can take the payment from the bank. And the payment of such checks can be stopped by the drawer by writing a letter to the banker regarding loss of check to make checks share and useful cost of checks as adopted. त्याच्यानंतर क्रॉसिंग चेकचे त्या ठिकाणी टाइप्स आहेत. फर्स्ट आहे त्या ठिकाणी टाइप्स जनरल क्रॉसिंग. ते जनरल क्रॉसिंग आपण बँकेतून बऱ्याच वेळा त्या ठिकाणी चेक हे केले असेल तर आडव्या दोन लाईन त्या ठिकाणी आपण सिलेक्ट करत असतो, तर त्याला जनरल क्रॉसिंग असं म्हणलं जातं. तर जो ऍक्ट 123 ऑफ द बँकिंग रेग्युलेशन ऍक्ट 1949 मध्ये झाला तो जनरल क्रॉसिंग चेकचा. On a check can be made by inserting two parallel lines on the left hand top corner of a check. The two lines themselves show that the check has to be written in a special way because something in addition to adding across checks has been inserted between the two parallel transverse lines. The options are to add certain words like and company are not negotiable. नेक्स्ट स्पेशल क्रॉसिंग जे आहे त्याचे पण त्यांनी पिक्चर दाखवले त्या ठिकाणी. तर स्पेशल क्रॉसिंग मीन्स ऑज इन्व्होक्स द प्रोव्हाइडेड ग्रेटर प्रोटेक्शन्स टू द ड्रॉवर ऑफ द checks. Checks are deemed to be specially crossed when in the parallel themselves lines in a check. The name of the banker is written, which or without the words not negotiable. Even two parallel transverse lines are not necessary for a special crossing. When a check is specially crossed, can be received only from the banker whose name appears on the face of the checks with or without the parallel lines. The banker collecting the checks can authorize an agent bank to collect the funds on its behalf. Next, that you can type crossing checks. Restrictive crossing. Restrictive crossing means involves the crossing of a check though two parallel lines on the left corner of a check. The words account pay are increased inside the parallel lines. These restrictions can be made though generally or specially crossing. It's provide higher protections to the drawer of the checks in case a check is misplaced or lost. According to this crossing, the check can be collected by the bank only for the person whose name is written on the checks. This crossing restricts the negotiability of the checks because the banker cannot collect checks on behalf of any person who is not named is the checks. If the banker makes the mistake of collecting the checks on behalf of a person whose name is not written on the checks, he will not be provided with any statutory protections under Section 131 of Banking Regulations Act. Next आहे त्या ठिकाणी bouncing of a dinosaur of checks. Bouncing of dishonor of checks. The first checks is said to be bounce or dishonor by non-payment when the drawee of checks makes a default in payment in when checks is presented to him for payment. First is liberty of drawee or dishonor. In case of default by the drawee shall complex the drawer for loss cost to him. The liberty of a drawee arise by non-payment if the following three conditions are fulfilled on the dishonor of check. First is the drawer of sufficient funds in the account. Next, such funds are probably applicable to payment of the checks. And third, the drawee is duly required to pay the checks. नेक्स्ट त्या ठिकाणी लिबर्टी ऑफ द ड्रॉवरी ऑन डिसऑनर. तर याच्या खाली त्या ठिकाणी कंडिशन्स आहेत. फर्स्ट कंडिशन आहे द चेक वॉज इश्यू टू डिस्चार्ज अ legally enforceable debit. Next आहे the checks was returned or dishonored by insufficiency of funds. Third, the checks was presented within 6 months from which it was drawn or validity period of checks. For the pay or the holder in due course has made a demand for the drawee within 30 days of dishonor. And fifth, the drawee of checks has failed to make a payment within 30 days of demand made, and a complaint and be made only by the P or the holder with the month of the expiry of 30 days of the expected of notice by the drawer. Next point आहे त्या ठिकाणी होल्डर. तर होल्डर्स मीन्स काय, तर होल्डर्स was a promissory note bill of exchange of checks means any person entitled in his own name to the permissions thereof and to receive or recover the amount due thereon from the parties thereof, where the note bill or check is lost or destroyed, its holder is the person so entitled at the time of such loss or distributions. Next, prevalence of a holder in due course. First, prevalence granted. The first one, the holder in due course of an instrument entitled to maintain and actions thereon in his own name against all the various parties of the instruments. तर हे 5 point त्या ठिकाणी दिले. Prevalence of holder in due course. So if the holder is due to course can claim full amount on the equitable instruments, even though such amount in excess of the amount authorized by the person delivering in full instrumentation. Next है payment in due course. Payment in due course means payment in accordance with the apparent or tenor of the instrumentation in good faith and without negligence to any person positions thereof under circumstances which do not offer a reasonable ground for believing that he is not entitled to receive payment of the amount therein mentioned. Next side, liberty of the paying banker. Where a check is crossed, generally the banker on whom it is drawn shall not pay it otherwise than to banker, and where a check is crossed, especially in the banker on whom it is drawn shall not pay in otherwise than to the banker to whom it is cross or is agent for collections. तर याचे दोन त्या ठिकाणी हे पडतात, लिबर्टी to the true owner of the checks and liberty on the drawer. Next time, when the banker must refuse of honor or customer checks. तर कस्टमर चेकच्या काही केसेस त्यांनी सांगितल्या. फर्स्ट सांगितलं when customer countermands payment, stop payment. Next, when can order when issue of court prohibits payment, when the banker receives notice to death of the customer, when the customer has been addressed as insolvent, and when the bank receives notice of customer insanity, and when the customer has given notice assignment of funds. असे वेगवेगळे आणि त्या ठिकाणी घेऊ शकतात. त्याच्यानंतर नेक्स्ट आहे ते बँकर मे रिफ्यूज द ऑनर ऑफ honors customer checks. The bankers may refuse to pay customer checks in the following case: first, insufficient funds of not applicable, thus presentment at different branch, presentment after banking hours, style checks is outdated checks, post-dated check and undated check. तर हे जे चेक्स आहेत ते त्या ठिकाणी रिफ्यूज ऑनर कस्टमर चेक्स त्या ठिकाणी होऊ शकतात. नेक्स्ट आहे त्या ठिकाणी मटेरियल अल्टरनेशन्स. Material alterations means indicates alterations or change in the material parts of the instruments. It may be defined as any change which alters to very natures of the instruments. Thus, it is the alternations which change and destroys the legal identity of the original instruments and causes it to speak a different language in legal effect from that which is original spoke. The material alternations makes the instruments avoid, for example, inoperative, and it affects the rights and obligations of the parties to the instruments. However, does not affect one who becomes a party of an instrument subsequent to its material alteration, if any. तर काही फॉलोइंग कन्सिडर द मटेरियल ऍक्शनच्या दिल्या. नेक्स्ट आहे त्या ठिकाणी इफेक्ट ऑफ द मटेरियल अल्टरनेशन्स. The main effect of a material alterations is that it makes the instruments avoid. For example, it discharge the instrument is set as against any person who was a party to such instruments at the time of material alternations and it not gives his approval to it. All the prior parties to negotiable instruments which was alternated subsequently without their consent thereto shall not be liable even to holder in due course having no notice or knowledge of the material alternations. त्याच्यानंतर acceptance of bills. Acceptance of bills is the instructions of court the instant by the robbery or his her agent towards the order of the robbery. A bill is said to have been accepted when the robbery signs across the face or of the bill with or without writing the words accepted and delivering in back to the holder are separately given him a note of his acceptance. The drawing of a bill ensures not eligible on any bill addressed to him for a payment until gives his or her acceptance and thereby becomes the acceptor thereof. Or refuse to accept gives the holder not right against the drawing. However, the holder in such situations can give notice of dishonor and show the drawer on indoors straight away. Example, without waiting for the date of maturity of the bill. Next point आहे त्या ठिकाणी essence of value acceptance. The types of acceptance आहे. तर general acceptance may be either general or qualified. Or general acceptance is it is can accept of bill without any qualifications. Or qualified acceptance of bill means Acceptance of a bill subjects with some qualifications. For example, accepting the bill subject to the conditions that the payment of bill shall be made only on happening of any events specified therein. And next, effects of a qualified acceptance. The holder may object to the qualified acceptance. In such case, it shall be treated that the bill is dishonored due to non-acceptance. Acceptance for honor. When a bill of exchange has been protested for dishonor by non-acceptance or proceed for better security and is not overdue, any person not being a party already legally thereon may, with the consent of the holder, interview and accept the billing. Supra protects for the owner of any party legally thereon or for the owner of the person for the whose account the bill is drawn. Next, liberty of the expected of the owner and agreement of acceptor for honor. त्याच्यानंतर payment for honor. Payment for honor, where a bill has been protested for non-payment and any person may interest to and pay in supra protects for the honor of any person liable thereof on for or for the honor of the persons for whose account it was drawn. The payment for honor supra protects in order to operate as such and not as a mere voluntary payment must be addressed by a notarial act of honor which may be adapted to the protest or from an attention to it. First is delegations before payment for honor. Second is performance of parties offering to pay for honor. And third, effect on subsequent parties where bill is paid for honor. And fourth, where holder refused to receive payment, supra protest, and fifth, rights of payer for honor. Next, dishonored by non-payment. A negotiable instrument shall be dishonored by non-payment if default in payment is made by the maker of a promissory note as expense of bill. A bill which does not require expense shall be dishonored by non-payment if default in payment is made by the drawer. A check shall be dishonored by non-payment by the drawer. Next, त्या ठिकाणी discharge of negotiable instruments. First is modes of discharge of liberty in negotiable instruments. त्याचे काही त्या ठिकाणी हे केलं पार्ट केलं. First आहे by cancelling, by release, by payment in the due course, and by allowing drawing material attentions, notice of dishonor, and by operations of law. तर इथं आपण थांबूया. नेक्स्ट पेजला आपण डिस्चार्ज ऑफ पार्टी हा पॉइंट आपण त्या ठिकाणी पाहणार आहोत. ओके, थँक्यू सो मच.